The Concord Council Hall was a massive room built from white stone that glowed faintly under its own light. Hundreds of delegates from dozens of species sat in curved rows that rose toward the ceiling like the inside of a shell. At the center of the floor stood a small podium, and behind it stood Commander Elena Voss, the human representative to the Galactic Concord. She had stood at that podium more times than she could count. Tonight was no different. The topic was familiar too: another border dispute, another human colony pushed back a few more kilometers, another vote that would not go in humanity's favor. The Velkari Compact requests an extension of mining rights along the Asheville Ridge, said the delegate from Velkar, a tall being with gray skin and 4 eyes that never seemed to blink. This area was settled by human colonists 11 years ago, but our historical claim predates their arrival by several centuries. Elena kept her face calm. She had learned long ago that anger did nothing in this room. The Concord respected calm voices and ignored loud ones, even when the loud ones were right. The colony of New Harbor has lived on that ridge for 11 years, she said. They built homes, schools, and farms. They did not know about any historical claim because no one filed one until the colony became profitable. A murmur went through the chamber. Some delegates nodded, most did not. The Velkari delegate spread his long hands. Profitable colonies often attract old claims. This is simply how the universe works, Commander. Perhaps your people should have checked the records first. Laughter, soft and polite, rippled through parts of the hall. Elena did not laugh. She had heard this kind of laughter many times in her career, and she had learned to let it pass through her without leaving a mark, at least on the outside. The vote went forward an hour later. 212 delegates in favor of the Velkari claim, 18 in favor of the human colony's right to stay. Elena did not look surprised when the numbers appeared on the screen above the podium. She gathered her notes, thanked the council for its time, and walked out through the long hallway that led to the human embassy wing. Outside, a young aide named Marcus Webb waited for her, with a tablet in his hand and worry on his face. They voted against us, he said. It was not a question. They did, Elena said. That's the 3rd colony this year. Earth Defense Council isn't going to like this. Earth Defense Council doesn't like much of anything that happens in that room, Elena said, but they understand why we stay. Marcus fell into step beside her as they walked. Do you understand why we stay? Sometimes I don't. We follow every rule. We pay every fee. We send our delegates to every meeting. And every single time, something gets taken from us anyway. Elena did not answer right away. They passed through a set of glass doors that led to a balcony overlooking the embassy gardens, manicured into the shapes preferred by a dozen different species, none of them human. We stay, she said finally, because we are still small. The Concord has fleets that could erase Earth from the sky in an afternoon if they decided humanity was a threat instead of a nuisance. We stay because every year we are here, we learn something new. About them. About their weapons, their politics, their weaknesses, their pride. And every year back home people are building. Marcus frowned. Building what? You'll see eventually. Not everyone needs to see it now. Elena's voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, like a current running beneath calm water. That night in her private quarters within the embassy, Elena opened a secure channel back to Earth. The screen flickered, then showed the face of General Adrian Cole, head of the newly formed Earth Defense Coalition. He looked tired, as he always did these days, but his eyes were sharp. Another colony lost, he asked without greeting. New Harbor, 11 years of work gone in one vote. Cole exhaled slowly. How many is that now, since the Concord recognized us? 6 colonies, 3 trade routes, 2 research stations shut down over safety concerns that conveniently benefited a Velkari mining company. Elena rubbed her eyes. They don't even try to hide it from us anymore, Adrian. They know we can't do anything. Can't yet, Cole said. Elena looked up at the screen. How close are we? Cole hesitated, the way he always did when the question touched on things only a handful of people were allowed to know. Closer than they think. The shipyards in the asteroid belt are ahead of schedule. The new drive systems passed every test we threw at them. We have engineers solving problems the conquered species stopped trying to solve 1,000 years ago because they got comfortable. Comfort makes you slow, Alina. We don't have the luxury of comfort. And the council? Let them have their votes. Let them take their colonies and their mining rights and their little victories in that big white room. Every single one of those votes is being recorded, documented, and saved. One day, and it will not be soon, but one day, we are going to need every piece of that record. Alina thought about Marcus's question from earlier. Do you understand why we stay? She thought about how to answer it honestly, even to herself. They think we're weak because we're patient, she said. They've never had to be patient about anything. Everything has always come easily to them. Conquest, technology, power. They inherited a galaxy already built for them by older civilizations that died out or moved on. We had to build everything ourselves from nothing, on a planet that tried to kill us at every step for 200,000 years before we even left it. That's the part they don't understand, Cole said. Patience isn't weakness. It's a weapon nobody else in this galaxy knows how to use anymore, because nobody else has needed it in centuries. Alina looked out her window at the alien sky above the embassy compound, dotted with 3 moons instead of 1. Somewhere far beyond that sky, ships were being built in silence. Engineers were solving problems no conquered scientist would think to ask. Soldiers were training in simulations more brutal than anything the conquered battle academies offered, because human commanders understood something the comfortable species had forgotten. That war is not a game with rules, and the side that survives is rarely the side with the most ships. It is the side that adapts fastest, suffers the most, and refuses to quit. There will be a line eventually, Alina said quietly. Something they do that goes too far even for us. There always is, Cole agreed. And when that day comes, Alina, I need you to be ready to walk out of that white room and never look back. I know. Until then. Until then, Alina said, we smile, we vote, we lose, and we wait. The channel closed. Alina sat alone in the dim light of her quarters for a long while, thinking of New Harbor's empty houses, of farms that would soon belong to Velkari mining crews, of children who would grow up without ever seeing the home their parents had built. She thought of patience, and how heavy a weapon it could be to carry for so many years. Far below the embassy, in hidden shipyards across the solar system, the weight of that patience was already being forged into something else entirely, something with edges, something that would, in time, demand to be used. The Council did not know it yet. Most humans did not know it yet, not the full shape of it. But the line Alina spoke of was closer than anyone in that white stone hall could have imagined, and when it came, the galaxy would learn exactly what 80 years of being underestimated had built in the dark. The attack on Solace Station happened on a quiet Tuesday morning, ship time, when most of the crew was asleep and the rest were running routine checks on the water recyclers. Solace Station was not a military post. It was a research outpost built by human scientists to study a strange gas cloud near the edge of conquered space, a cloud that seemed to hold compounds no one had ever cataloged before. 43 people lived there, biologists, chemists, a small medical team. 2 children, the sons of the station's lead engineer, who had been born on the station and had never set foot on Earth. The ships that attacked did not announce themselves. They came out of the dark in formation, 4 Velkari warships marked with no insignia, and opened fire on the station's outer ring before anyone inside even knew they were under attack. The station's defense systems, designed for debris and minor hazards, never had a chance to respond. Within 11 minutes, Solace Station was a field of drifting wreckage and frozen bodies. When the news reached the conquered council 3 days later, it did not come from the Velkari government. It came from a human salvage ship that had arrived to deliver supplies and found nothing left to deliver them to. Alina Voss stood at the same podium where she had argued over mining rights and trade routes 100 times before. This time her hands were shaking, though she kept them flat against the podium's edge so no one could see. 43 people, she said, 2 of them children, killed by warships that fired without warning, without provocation, and without any attempt at communication. The Velkari delegate, a different one than before, rose to speak. His tone was practiced, smooth, the tone of someone who had rehearsed this exact kind of statement many times. The Velkari government extends its sympathy for this tragedy, he said. However, an internal investigation has determined that the ships in question were not under official Velkari command. They were operated by an independent contractor group that has since been disavowed. Disavowed, Alina repeated. 43 people are dead and your response is one word. The council understands this is distressing. However, without clear evidence linking the Velkari government directly to the order, this matter falls outside the council's jurisdiction for formal sanction. We recommend the matter be handled through standard compensation channels. A few delegates shifted in their seats, uncomfortable. Most did not move at all. Alina looked up at the rows of faces above her, beings of a dozen species who had sat through her speeches for years, who had voted against human interests so many times that she had stopped expecting otherwise. She searched their expressions for something resembling outrage. She found very little. Compensation channels, she said slowly. You want to put a price on 2 children. The Velkari delegate did not answer that directly. The council suggests a formal review process to be completed within the standard 18-month window. 18 months, Alina had heard enough. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The Earth Defense Coalition formally withdraws from all conquered oversight committees, effective immediately. Human ships will no longer report movements to conquered traffic control. Human trade will no longer pass through conquered-administered checkpoints. And any vessel that enters human territory without clearance will be treated as a hostile incursion. The chamber went silent in a way it had never gone silent before. Then the noise started, dozens of voices speaking over each other, delegates rising from their seats, aides rushing toward exits to send urgent messages back to their governments. The Velkari delegate, to his credit, recovered his composure faster than most. Commander Voss, this is an extreme overreaction. Humanity does not have the capability to enforce such a withdrawal. Your fleet consists of... You don't know what our fleet consists of, Alina said. You've never asked. You've never needed to ask because you assumed we were too small to matter. I would suggest you start asking now. She turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving 43 names behind her on the official record, and the first true silence the council had ever given to a human request. Within hours, the message reached every conquered member state. Earth was no longer participating in the system that had governed its relationship with the galaxy for 8 decades. Most governments treated it as posturing, a grieving species making a dramatic gesture that would quietly resolve itself once tempers cooled. The Velkari High Command treated it differently. General Tarsk Ivan, commander of the Velkari 3rd Fleet, called an emergency session with his senior officers the same night the news broke. They're bluffing, said one of his captains. Humanity has perhaps 200 warships, most of them outdated by conquered standards. We have fleets 10 times that size within a week's travel of their core systems. Perhaps, Ivan said. He was older than most of his officers, old enough to remember a time before the conquered had grown comfortable, before victories came easily and threats stopped being taken seriously. Something about the human commander's words, relayed to him secondhand, sat uneasily in his stomach. You don't know what our fleet consists of. Send a probe fleet to the edge of their territory, Ivan ordered. Nothing aggressive. I want to see what they actually have out there before anyone makes a decision about what comes next. Caution, sir. Over a species that builds ships from scrap metal and prayer. Over a species we have never actually tested, Ivan said. We assume things about humanity because they have been polite for 80 years. Polite is not the same as weak. I learned that lesson once, a long time ago, from a species far less developed than the humans, and it nearly cost me my command. I do not intend to learn it twice. His officers exchanged glances, but did not argue further. Back on Earth, General Adrian Cole watched the recording of Alina's speech with his senior staff gathered around him in a dim command room buried 300 meters beneath the Nevada desert. When it ended, no one spoke for a long moment. She did it, Cole said finally. She drew the line. 18 months, muttered Colonel Reyes Patel, the coalition's chief strategist. They wanted us to wait 18 months for a committee to decide whether killing children was worth a formal sanction. They're going to send ships to test us, Cole said. Probably within the week. They won't believe we're serious until they see something with their own eyes. Are we ready? Cole was quiet for a moment, thinking of the shipyards in the asteroid belt, the new drive systems, the decades of patient, hidden work that Alina had spoken of in private channels for years. He thought of 43 names, 2 of them children, and the 18-month window that would never see a single day pass. We've been ready longer than they know, he said. Sound the readiness alert across every fleet, quietly. No public announcements yet. Let them come and look. Let them see exactly enough to start worrying and not one piece more. Patel nodded and reached for the comm. Across the solar system, in shipyards hidden behind asteroid fields and inside hollowed-out moons, engines that had never been tested in open battle began their final preparations. Crews that had trained for years without ever firing a shot in anger checked their systems one final time. 43 people had died over a research station no one outside humanity had ever cared about. The Council had offered 18 months and a price tag. Humanity had offered silence, and then, very quietly, the first true movement of a war that the rest of the galaxy did not yet know had already begun. The Valkyrie probe fleet entered the edge of human territory 8 days after Alina Voss walked out of the conquered chamber. It was a modest force, 6 ships under the command of Captain Reth Solon, sent not to provoke a war but to measure exactly how much of a threat, if any, the humans actually posed. Solon had read every report the Conquered held on human military capability. The numbers were unimpressive, old ship designs, modest weapons, a fleet that on paper could be brushed aside by a force a fraction the size of his own homeworld's reserves. He expected to find exactly what the reports described. Outdated vessels patrolling quiet borders, perhaps a token show of force meant to satisfy a grieving public back on Earth. What he found instead made him radio home twice before he had even finished his approach. The border of human space was not guarded by the old fleet the Conquered database described. It was guarded by something else entirely, ships of a design Solon had never seen in any catalog, sleek and dark, moving with a precision that did not match anything in the human military history file. They did not approach his fleet aggressively. They simply appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, positioned at exact intervals around his ships, close enough that any sudden move would be suicide for both sides. A single channel opened on his bridge. The voice that came through was calm, almost gentle. "This is Commander Reyes Patel of the Earth Defense Coalition. You have entered restricted human territory. State your intentions." Solon straightened in his chair, trying to keep his voice steady. "Captain Reth Solon, Valkyrie 3rd Fleet. We are conducting a routine survey of the border region. No hostile intent." "Understood," Patel said. "You have 30 seconds to reverse course before this stops being a survey and starts being an incident." Solon glanced at his tactical officer, who was staring at the readings with an expression Solon had never seen on her face before. Fear, he realized. Real fear. "Sir," she said quietly, "their ships are reading sensor signatures unlike anything in our database. Their drive systems are operating at efficiency levels our engineers said were theoretically impossible 11 years ago. How many ships do they actually have out here? I count 12 on visual, but sir, I'm picking up faint signatures suggesting at least 40 more holding position just beyond effective scanning range. They want us to see exactly this many and not one ship more. Solon understood then, the way a man understands cold water only after it has already closed over his head. The conquered reports were not just outdated. They were a story humanity had allowed the galaxy to believe, carefully, for decades. Reverse course, Solon ordered, full retreat. Now, as his ships turned, the human fleet did not pursue. They simply held their positions, watching, until the Velkari ships vanished back across the border. It was not a battle. It was a demonstration, precise and almost courteous in its restraint, and it terrified Solon more than any battle could have. General Tarsk Ivan received the report within hours, and unlike his junior officers, he did not dismiss it. 40 additional ships holding beyond scan range deliberately, Ivan said, reading the report a second time. They wanted us to know they were there without telling us how many. That is not the behavior of a desperate species bluffing for time. That is the behavior of a species that has already decided exactly how this conversation will go. It could still be a trick, argued Commander Yashil Tor, the fleet's senior tactician, a Velkari officer known for his caution bordering on paranoia, which made his next words carry more weight than usual. Holographic decoys, sensor ghosts, there are many ways to fake a fleet's size. Perhaps, Ivan said. But Solon's tactical officer reported drive efficiencies 11 years beyond anything in our intelligence files. You cannot fake an engine signature that precisely, not against sensors calibrated by our own engineers. Whatever else is true, the ships that were visible were real, and they were not the ships we expected to find. A heavy silence settled over the command room. What do we tell the council? Tor asked. The truth, Ivan said. That humanity has spent the last several decades building something we never bothered to look for, because we never imagined a species so young could build anything worth fearing, and that the Council's 18-month committee has just run out of time. The Council did not believe him at first. Reports from a single probe fleet, dismissed by several delegates as exaggeration born of fear, were debated for 2 full days while human ships, the one Solon's sensors had only glimpsed at the edge of detection, began moving. They did not move toward Velkari space first. They moved toward the abandoned mining stations and disputed colonies that had been taken from humanity over the past 8 decades, the very places the Council had voted away in committee after committee. New Harbor, the Asheville Ridge, 6 colonies in total, each one reclaimed within a single day, with a precision and coordination that left almost no resistance standing by the time the sun rose over each world. There was no triumphant broadcast, no declaration of victory sent to the conquered council, just brief, factual messages relayed quietly through diplomatic backchannels. Human territory has been returned to human control. No further action will be taken against parties who withdraw peacefully within 48 hours. It was the 48 hours that unsettled the council most of all. A species at war, truly desperate or truly vengeful, does not offer mercy windows. It does not give its enemies a clean and dignified way to retreat. Humanity's restraint felt, to many delegates, more frightening than outright aggression would have been, because restraint suggested confidence rather than fear. Alina Voss watched the reports come in from a secure room within the human embassy, the same embassy she had walked through 100 times feeling small and patient and powerless. Marcus Webb stood beside her, staring at the tactical displays with wide eyes. They took back every colony, he said, all 6 in one day. Adrian told me the fleet was ready, Alina said. I don't think even I understood how ready. What happens now? Alina thought of General Ivan's report, parts of which had already leaked through diplomatic channels, parts she suspected the Velkari government had leaked deliberately as a kind of warning to other conquered members. Do not underestimate what we just underestimated. Now, she said, the rest of the galaxy finds out exactly what 80 years of patience were actually for. Far across human space, in the asteroid shipyards that had built every ship in that quiet, devastating fleet, engineers and crews who had trained for years without firing a single shot in true combat were already preparing for what would come next. They had been patient. They had been careful. They had let the galaxy believe a comfortable story about a weak, young species for 8 decades. Because that story had bought them the time they needed to build something the comfortable species of the conquered had long forgotten how to imagine. The mask had come off. What was underneath it had no further reason to hide. The Velkari Council convened a war session within a week of losing the 6 disputed colonies, and within that single meeting, the comfortable assumptions of 80 years collapsed entirely. General Tarsk Ivan stood before the assembled war ministers, no longer the cautious voice warning of an unknown threat, but the commander now tasked with answering it. They are not raiding our territory, Ivan told the ministers. They took back what was already theirs and stopped. That is the behavior of a species fighting for something specific, not a species hungry for conquest. If we attack their core systems now, in force, we may be starting a war we do not need to fight. They humiliated us, said Minister Dalvesh, the loudest voice among the war ministers, a politician far more comfortable with speeches than battle plans. 6 colonies, taken in a single day, with our own fleets unable to respond in time. The conquered member states are already questioning whether Velkar can be trusted to manage its own borders. We cannot allow that humiliation to stand unanswered. There is a difference between answering humiliation and provoking annihilation, Ivan said. I do not yet know which path leads where with this enemy. I only know that every assumption we made about them 8 days ago was wrong, and I would prefer to test the next assumption more carefully than the last one. The ministers voted anyway, 11-4, in favor of a full retaliatory strike against human shipping lanes near the contested border. Ivan received the order the same evening, along with a fleet of 300 warships and instructions to make humanity regret its arrogance. He followed the order. He had no other choice, but he did so with a caution his superiors mistook for hesitation. The first true battle of the war took place near a quiet trade corridor the humans called the Threshold, 11 days after the colonies were reclaimed. Ivan's fleet outnumbered the human defense force nearly 4-1 on arrival, and for the first several minutes, it seemed the numbers would matter exactly as much as they always had in conquered warfare. Then the human ships began to move in ways Ivan's tactical computers could not predict. They did not hold formation the way conquered doctrine expected. They scattered, regrouped, scattered again, striking at exact moments when Velkari shield rotations left brief, almost invisible gaps. Ivan watched on his command display as 3 of his largest cruisers lost power within minutes of each other, struck by precisely targeted fire through openings his own engineers had assured him did not exist in their shield cycles. They're reading our shield patterns in real time, his tactical officer said, voice tight with disbelief. Sir, that should not be possible. Our shield modulation algorithms are supposed to be unpredictable. Apparently not unpredictable enough, Ivan said grimly. The battle lasted under 2 hours. When it ended, Ivan's fleet had lost 40 ships. The human defense force, smaller by every measure that had mattered for 80 years, had lost 6. It was not a massacre. The humans fought with a controlled, almost mournful precision, retreating wounded ships rather than destroying them outright when retreat was possible, a restraint that struck Ivan as more unsettling than cruelty would have been. He sent his report back to the war ministers that night, knowing it would not be well received. 300 ships, sent to teach a lesson, had returned having learned one instead. On the human side, the cost was felt differently. Commander Reyes Patel stood in the command center of the flagship Meridian, watching the casualty reports scroll past on her screen. 6 ships, 41 crew members confirmed dead, 18 more in critical condition aboard the medical frigate trailing behind the main fleet. "We won," said her executive officer, a young man named Lieutenant Akafer, trying to find something steady to say into the silence of the command deck. "We did," Patel said. 41 people are not coming home because of a vote in a white room about mining rights and dead children that nobody wanted to take seriously. I would not call that winning. I would call it surviving the cost of being ignored for 8 decades. She thought of Elena Voss's voice on the recorded channel, calm and steady at that podium, drawing a line the council never believed would hold. She thought of the engineers who had spent years building ship systems that no one outside a handful of secure facilities had ever been allowed to see, building toward a day they all hoped would never actually come. "Send the casualty list to Earth," Patel said. "All of it, every name. I want the public to understand exactly what this is costing, every single time." The war that followed across the next several months did not resemble the swift, decisive conquest that conquered military doctrine usually produced against weaker species. It moved in careful, costly steps. Human fleets struck precisely at military targets, leaving civilian infrastructure and population centers largely untouched, a restraint that confused Velkari strategists who had been trained to expect total war once hostilities began. General Ivan came to understand the pattern faster than his superiors did. "They are not trying to destroy us," he told the war ministers after the 4th major engagement. This one fought to a costly draw near the Velkari home system's outer defenses. "They are trying to make every single battle expensive enough that we choose to stop fighting before they are forced to choose between mercy and victory. I do not believe they want our destruction. I believe they want this to be the last time anyone underestimates them." "And if we do not stop fighting?" Minister Dalvesh asked. His earlier confidence now considerably diminished after 3 more colonies and 2 border fleets had been lost in the months since the war began. "Then I believe they will give us exactly what we asked for when we ignored their warning," Ivan said quietly. "I believe they will finish what we started, and I do not believe we will enjoy finding out what that finish looks like." There was a young Velkari attaché named Sarovel who had spent years working within the conquered council chambers, who had watched Elena Voss stand at that podium dozens of times and had quietly admired her composure even while voting against her requests, because that was simply how the system worked and no one had ever questioned it. Vel tried twice to warn his own government, through proper channels, that the human commander's restraint was not weakness but discipline, and that continuing the war risked far greater losses than continuing the peace ever would have. Both warnings were filed, acknowledged, and ignored by ministers more interested in saving face than saving lives. By the war's 6th month, the cost on both sides had grown heavy enough that even the most stubborn voices in the Velkari War Ministry had begun, quietly, to ask what an end to the fighting might actually require. On Earth, in the command room 300 meters beneath the Nevada desert, General Adrian Cole reviewed the latest reports with the same tired eyes he had carried since the war's first day. The shipyards that had built humanity's quiet fleet were now running at full capacity, building replacements for losses no one had wanted to take, even in victory. "They're asking for terms," Cole said, reading the latest diplomatic transmission relayed through a neutral conquered channel. Quietly, through back doors, no formal request yet, but it's coming. Elena Voss, present by secure video link from the embassy she had not left in months, allowed herself the smallest measure of relief. "How much longer do you think they'll hold out before they ask properly?" "Not much longer," Cole said. "Ivan's reports are leaking through conquered channels faster than his own government can contain them. He's telling anyone who will listen that this war cannot be won the old way, against an enemy that learned patience while everyone else forgot what it was for." Elena thought of the 80 years that had led to this moment, the votes lost, The colonies taken. The calm words exchanged across that white stone chamber while something else entirely was being built in the dark beyond it. Then let them ask, she said. And when they do, we will remember exactly what their answer was, the last time we asked them for something far simpler than peace. The formal request for peace talks arrived through the Concord Council 8 months after the war began, delivered not by the Velkhari government directly, but by a neutral mediator species that had stayed carefully out of the conflict from its first day. Elena Voss read the request twice before responding, and when she did respond, she did not send her answer to the council chamber, where she had spent so many years losing votes that had never mattered as much as this one would. She sent her answer directly to General Tarsk Ivan. Peace talks will be held, her message read, but not in the council chamber and not under Concord oversight. We have learned, at considerable cost, what Concord oversight is worth. Talks will be held aboard a neutral station, between human representatives and Velkhari representatives only. No committees. No 18-month review windows. If your government wants this war to end, it can sit across a table from the people it underestimated and say so plainly. Ivan, who had spent 8 months watching his fleets shrink, and his government's confidence crumble alongside them, did not hesitate before recommending the Velkhari Council accept the terms exactly as written. The talks took place aboard a small neutral station near the war's old border, the same border Captain Solon had crossed with such confidence so many months before. Elena Voss represented humanity, flanked by General Cole and Commander Patel. Ivan represented Velkhar, flanked by Minister Dalvesh, whose earlier confidence had worn down to something far more careful and far more humble. We are prepared to recognize human sovereignty over all previously disputed territories, Dalvesh began, reading from a prepared statement with the stiff formality of someone trying very hard to sound like he was not surrendering. We are also prepared to discuss appropriate compensation for the loss of Solace Station and for the civilian and military casualties incurred during the recent conflict. Elena let the silence stretch for a moment before answering, not out of theater, but because she wanted to be certain her next words would be heard clearly. We are not interested in compensation, Minister. We are interested in something the Council was unwilling to offer us 8 months ago, when 43 people died and your government called it a matter for an 18-month review. Dalvash's jaw tightened slightly. What does humanity require then? Acknowledgement, Elena said. A formal, permanent record entered into Concord archives, stating exactly what happened at Solace Station, who was responsible, and why the Council's response was inadequate. Full sovereignty over our territory, with no future claims permitted under any historical precedent older than our own colonization. And a binding agreement that any future act of aggression against human territory will be treated, by every conquered member state, as an act of war against the entire conquered, not a private matter to be settled through quiet compensation. Ivan spoke for the first time since the talks began. You are not asking for control over conquered governance. You are not asking for territory beyond what was already yours. No, Elena said. We never wanted an empire, General. We wanted to stop being treated as though our lives and our work mattered less than a mining contract. That is all this was ever about. It took 3 more days of careful negotiation before the terms were finalized, but the shape of the agreement Elena had outlined on the first day remained largely unchanged by the end. The Velkhari government signed first, followed by formal endorsement from the wider Concord Council, who had watched the entire war unfold from the safety of their white stone chamber, and had finally, belatedly, understood what 80 years of polite dismissal had cost them. The signing did not happen in the council chamber. Elena had insisted on that detail specifically, and no one argued with her. It happened instead in a quiet room aboard the neutral station, with no cheering delegates and no triumphant speeches, only the soft sound of formal documents being finalized, and the heavier silence of everyone present understanding exactly what the war had cost to reach this point. Afterward, as the Velkari delegation prepared to leave, Ivan approached Elena alone. "May I ask you something, Commander Voss?" "You may." 80 years of patience, he said. 8 decades of votes you knew you would lose, of colonies you knew would be taken, of insults you absorbed without complaint. Was it always the plan to let us believe you were weak for so long? Elena considered the question carefully before answering. It was never a plan to deceive you, General. It was simply the truth for most of those 80 years. We were weak in the ways that mattered to your council. We did not have the ships, the technology, or the standing to demand anything we are demanding now. What we had was time, and the willingness to use it building something instead of demanding something we could not yet earn. And now we are no longer weak, Elena said. I would prefer that we never have to prove that again. I suspect you would prefer the same. Ivan nodded slowly. I believe most of the conquered underestimated humanity because young species are rarely patient. Patience is usually a luxury older civilizations afford themselves, once they have already won enough to feel secure. You found a way to be patient before you had won anything at all. I do not know what that says about your species, Commander, but I do not think the rest of the galaxy will underestimate it again. Elena thought of New Harbor's empty houses, of 43 names recorded permanently in conquered archives, of a war fought with restraint that had still cost more lives than she would ever be able to forget. There was no triumph in her chest as she stood there, only a quiet, heavy relief that the fighting had finally stopped, and a colder certainty that it should never have needed to start in the first place. It says, she said finally, that we learned to wait, General. Nothing more dramatic than that. We waited, we built, and when waiting was no longer enough, we used what we had built as carefully as we could. I hope your council remembers the lesson without needing another war to teach it twice. Months later, back on Earth, Elena stood at a small memorial ceremony for the crew of Solace Station, the same 43 names that had once meant nothing to a chamber full of delegates in a white stone hall. Marcus Webb stood beside her now as a full diplomat in his own right, no longer the worried aide who had once asked her why humanity bothered staying patient at all. "Do you think it was worth it?" he asked quietly, watching the names scroll past on the memorial screen. "Everything we built in secret, everything it cost once we finally had to use it." Elena watched the last name fade from the screen, a child who had never seen Earth, never would now, and thought of the long line of small humiliations that had led to this single, terrible cost. "I think," she said slowly, "that no species should ever need a war to be taken seriously. I think the Council should have listened the first time, not the 100th. But we are not the ones who decided patience would have to end in fire, Marcus. They decided that, the day they called 2 dead children a matter for an 18-month review." She looked out at the gathered crowd, humans who had spent 80 years being polite to a galaxy that mistook politeness for permission, and who now stood a little straighter, a little more certain of their place among the stars than they had ever been allowed to feel before. "Was it worth it?" she repeated softly. "I don't know if that's the right question. I only know that we are still here, still ourselves, and the next time someone in that white stone room considers dismissing a dead child as a procedural matter, they will remember exactly what came after the last time anyone tried." The memorial screen went dark. Around her, the crowd remained quiet for a long moment, the kind of silence that comes not from emptiness, but from everyone present understanding, fully and finally, exactly what had been won, and exactly what it had taken to win it.